My name's Tim Roseman. I'm the Artistic Director of Playwriting Australia. I'd like to acknowledge that we are located here in Sydney on the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay respect to elders past and present. Playwriting Australia is so pleased to welcome you to the second international workshop for the Bruntwood Prize for Playwriting 2017. The Bruntwood Prize is an initiative of the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester and property company Bruntwood. This masterclass is part of a new initiative to stream 3 international masterclasses from India, the United States and Australia completely for free and live, available at writerplay.co.uk. To apply for the Bruntwood Prize, entrants must be resident in the United Kingdom, but the workshops are here to support writers worldwide. Playwriting Australia is the national body for new play development. We work with playwrights at every level of their career from across the country with a vision to foster a generation of unignorable, essential, extraordinary plays that are really the very best that they can be. We provide craft support for writers at the emerging level of their career, and that's one of the things that we hope to do in today's masterclass. I've the great pleasure to introduce Joanna Murray-Smith. She is a generous, a talented and prolific writer who's been described by US Variety as Australia's foremost female playwright, and they're not wrong. Her plays include Honour, The Gift, The Female of the Species, Switzerland, and as we speak, her new play, Three Little Words, is in production at Melbourne Theatre Company. She has written over 24 plays, and they've been produced in over 30 countries, including at the National Theatre in London, in the West End, and across the United States. Amazingly, between 1987 and 2013, Jo was one of 5 writers whose plays were responsible for an extraordinary 24% of all of the ticket sales for new plays in Australia. Because she's such a unique expert in character and relationships, we've asked her today to present a workshop called Life Experience and the Dramatic Journey. For more information about Playwriting Australia, visit us at pwa.org.au, where you can also find Joanna Murray-Smith's moving and beautiful keynote address at the 2015 National Play Festival. Until then, please do enjoy Jo Murray-Smith's masterclass. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Joanna Murray-Smith. I'm here to run a masterclass for the Royal Exchange in the UK and Playwriting Australia, a wonderful institution, organised me to come here and talk to all of you and to the world out there of aspiring playwrights because they felt, I hope, that their faith is going to be rewarded, that I have something to tell you about playwriting. First of all, I'd like to offer a welcome to country. I'd like to acknowledge that the wonderful Victorian College of the Arts, where we are presently, epicentre of the Australian imagination, is on the land of the Bun Wurrung and Woi Wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. The Kulin Nation is an alliance of 5 Indigenous Australian tribes in south-central Victoria, the state that we're in right now. And before European settlement in Australia, the central area of Victoria had been inhabited for an estimated 30 to 40,000 years by the Kulin Nation. So we're here now, 2017. And I think the best way to begin is by introducing ourselves one by one, and perhaps as a bit of a fun icebreaker, we could each say one thing about ourselves which is unlikely to be true of anybody else sitting here. So, would you like to begin?
I will try. I'm Katie. And I grew up in the world of amateur theatre, so as a young'un, a lot of terrible plays with my family.
Thank you, Katie.
Hi, I'm Natasha. I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 2 years. Yeah, No one else does that.
That's all I got.
I'm Grace. I was born in Hong Kong and lived there till I was 4.
Great. I should offer one. I was involved in a dangerous gun incident in the last year. No more will be said about that, but I figured it was unlikely to be true of any of you, so go ahead.
Yeah, definitely not on my. My name is Jordan, and both of my parents have been working in nursing for the past 40 years.
My name's Laura, and I was born without a sense of smell.
Fascinating.
I'm Dan, and I've got an enormous tattoo of Samuel Beckett on my left thigh that I got in Dublin, but it looks a bit like a zombie Samuel Beckett now, sadly.
Well, I think you should be running the masterclass, so we'll swap. Wow, that's. Were you just sort of trying to kind of shortcut the whole process of learning how to be a playwright?
It should show my commitment to the muse.
Very good, very nice. All right, so we're just going to start right away with writing something. I just want you to write a few sentences about a piece of art in any medium that moved you and why it moved you. Just a few sentences. It can be anything. It can be a book, it can be a play, it can be a painting, piece of music. So maybe Jiu-Jitsu woman do you mind sharing yours?
Yeah, sure.
Let us know, what's the piece of art that moved you?
I recently bought my first piece of art, proper adult. I'm a fan of this artist for a long time. He's a cartoonist named Joan Carnelia, and he kind of is more like quite darkly comedic, and the piece of work I bought is this really funny piece of this painting. He's a very kind of almost childlike way of painting, and it's this man, it's the same character in all those paintings, standing in a beautiful green field wearing a suit, but he's pulled his pants down, but instead of his butt is his face again. And I bought it and I hung it up in my house, and I loved it because it was so unwaveringly bold and hilarious, and it was seemingly offensive. Like everyone, like my mum was like, "Oh my god," but it's not offensive at all. I loved how cleverly simple it was, and it's one of my favourite paintings to look at.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks, Natasha. Grace, what about you?
The last thing that really affected me was, again, visual art. It was a giant Rothko painting. It was, I don't know what it was called. It was just beautiful and red, and one of those smaller red rectangles within it. And I just loved how the colour itself was just so rich, and the canvas was so large. And it just felt like it could envelop you and take you to another world. Yeah, there's a comfort there.
Yeah, wonderful. And Katie?
Mine was music, and recently I was lucky to hear Patti Smith singing Bob Dylan's Hard Rain, festival hall here, and it was just the most incredibly moving experience, being surrounded by all those people joining in on the chorus, and then the hush that fell, hearing the poet that is Patti Smith, the words of Bob Dylan through her. It's just an incredible,
Wonderful.
experience.
Dan?
I was listening to a song a couple of days ago by Ryan Adams called Cry on Demand. How'd you learn to cry on demand? And there's all these images in it that seem very simple, but give this backstory that sort of give you this like an image of plastic flowers on the top of a fireplace absorbing the smoke from the fire, and people staring at their shoes and smoking. It's just sort of images of that, and a woman who's learned to cry on demand, and all these separate images together just always create these strong backstories for me.
And what does the creation of the backstory do for you? How does it make you feel?
It's got that sweet sadness. It's that melancholy, but I don't quite know why. I'm not relating it to any particular. But somehow those arrangements of images get to something that I recognise.
Great. Laura?
I recently went and saw some of the Bill Henson photos that are at the NGV at the moment, and there was just one photograph of all these tourists looking at these really old crumbling statues of people, and it just suddenly reminded me about like the way in which we are just part of this huge species that's very ancient, and we've always been obsessed with the self and identifying the self, and even back then and even now, just kind of this elongated kind of conversation that we've always had. And like this weird obsession, we don't realise it because we're all living in the time that we are living in. But yeah, it just kind of reminded me of that, which was amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And Jordan?
It was a play. It was Lucy Kirkwood's Chimerica. And I think it allowed me, when I saw it in Sydney, to feel comfortable as not only an Asian Australian, but as a writer and as an artist, to feel quite inspired. And 3 hours never went quicker, which is really weird because I tend to like get a bit fidgety after 2.5 hours. But it was, for me, it was bilingual, and there were no subtitles, and I'd seen plays that were bilingual and had subtitles, and I felt kind of excluded, but in the best way, because I was seeing part of their world. And that was special.
That's wonderful. Well, I mean, the reason why I wanted to begin with that was that it's a real help, I think, to identify what we're looking for in art. And I think that if we respond to art as receivers of it rather than producers of it, and we think about what the things that move us, why they move us and how they move us, it's very, very helpful to us in our own creativity to sort of keep our eye on the ball of what our ambitions should be for our own work. So the things that were coming up there were humour was very important. A certain amount of rebelliousness when you were talking about your mother's reaction. A feeling of connection, when you were talking about Patti Smith, that idea of not just it being what you are listening to and what you're watching, but also the feeling in the room, that feeling of connectedness in receiving it, as well as the kind of majesty of the words. We were talking about, you were talking about backstories and a sort of sense of being allowed into people's narratives, feeling a sense of connection with other people. You were, Laura, very, economically and beautifully referring to a sense of perspective of our own, we are our own little people living our own little lives, but actually we are connected to one another because we're all born at within the same kind of general lifespan. And we're obsessed with the same things. We're obsessed with our images and with one another. and identity, of course, you know, is very important. That sense of having our identity recognised and knowing that we're fundamentally, I think, knowing that we're not alone. I mean, I think all of those works of art that you were talking about, all of those experiences were about feeling not isolated, about feeling connected to the world. And, you know, when I was a little girl, this is going to be quite personal, this masterclass. I kind of talk, I hope, not too boringly about my own story, but as a little girl, my parents took me to the theatre a lot, and I used to love that moment before the curtain came up, when the lights came down, and in those days you had curtains. That's how old I am. And just that feeling of what was going to be revealed, you know, that sense of what world was about to be revealed, that sense of discovery that you were about to be transported. I think you talked about, you know, the idea of being transported. And in fact, when I met my agent, who I had, you know, forever until last year when she died, the reason I knew that she was going to be the right agent was that she said to me, in the very first 5 minutes that we met one another, she said, "Well, Jo, I can only tell you that the reason I'm in theatre is because when I was a little girl, I used to sit down in that auditorium, and the moment that the lights came down and the curtain was about to come up, I had this incredible, overwhelming desire to just stand up and scream." And I thought, okay, you're the one. You're the one. Anyway, I'm digressing, as you'll find that I do a lot, but essentially, that feeling that I had as a little girl about wanting to be transported, and that feeling of excitement about what world we're about to enter, is still the feeling that I have when I sit down and write a play. That is, I'm not consciously summoning it, but it's a feeling that has never gone away, and I kind of hold that as very precious. And whenever I see something that really deeply moves me, and you know, you can be moved through comedy as much as through tragedy, but I really try to hold on to that sense of being, of how I'm being affected. And when I'm writing, it's a very immodest ambition, but I think it's a very important ambition nonetheless, to want to be able to deliver that to your audience. Doesn't matter what form you write in, doesn't matter whether you're essentially a comedic writer or a surreal writer or a lyrical writer or whatever. You are trying to connect with your audience, and I think it's very important to keep that in mind. I've been changed by things that I've seen or words that I've read, and that possibility of art, the fact that art can change people, you know, it doesn't happen all the time. In fact, perhaps it happens rarely, and it certainly happens rarely in terms of what I produce, but it can happen. And just the sheer possibility of that, I think, is a great ignition for you when you're sitting down to write. So, keeping in mind how good other people's work is very important, and using that as a benchmark for your own work. If we don't like to be bored as an audience, so we must not bore as writers. We don't like to be condescended to. If we go to a play and feel as if we're being condescended to, it's a horrible feeling, or being lectured, you know, didactically. And we feel, you know, sometimes we come out of plays and think that writer didn't realise how smart I was. I was just as smart as him or her. So let's not condescend to our audience. We love to be surprised when we see a work of art, because, you know, the same stories are told over and over. We've seen the same stories. And when a story that is familiar to us also manages to be surprising, that's an incredibly exciting moment, I think, in our experience as an audience. So let's try to be surprising. And as I will talk about a lot in the course of this masterclass, being surprising is usually about being very, very, very personal. So perhaps mostly what we like when we experience a work of art, particularly perhaps a play, is we like to suspend disbelief. There is no feeling better, I think, and I think that this is probably true for all of us, than to enter the world that is being made, to enter the world of the creator, and to do so without being doubtful, without being distracted, without being distrustful, without being cynical, without feeling manipulated. We like to let go of those very analytical parts of ourselves and allow ourselves to kind of be submerged in the world of the creator. So when that happens, and you know, it's very hard, I think, for that to happen to those of us who work in the arts, because the older we get and the more experience we get, the more analytical we become, I think. But in a sense, when it happens, it's so magical and so wonderful and so transformative. And you know that when that happens, it's because there is something about what you're watching or what you're experiencing that's really deeply authentic to you. It just feels real and true to you. And sometimes you don't know why it feels true or why it feels authentic, but on some level it does. It rings that bell of truthfulness inside you. And of course, when you don't suspend disbelief, the opposite happens. You have that bell ringing all the time, telling you, I'm being manipulated, or they're doing this for this reason, or they're trying to make me feel that. And so when you don't have that, it's such a glorious feeling. So I think it's important to go back to the beginning and ask, what makes our writing authentic? What really makes our writing do that for other people, feel truthful for other people? And I think, and this may be Crayola, so to speak, saying things, that are very, very basic, but I still think it's worth saying that the power and the potency of your story, the story that you're writing, is fundamentally and profoundly connected to how truthful it is to you, how truthful it is within your own body, within your own memory, within your own archive of emotions. And so truth in your writing has really nothing to do with a logical external reality. It's everything to do with being emotionally truthful. If we get structure, suspense, humanity, and emotion right, we can make any story momentarily believable, for the course of 90 minutes or 100 minutes of an audience in a theatre. We have advantages, the lights are down, people's devices are turned off, which is a major advantage these days, almost the only place where it happens. If I could lock the doors, I would, but workplace safety, people won't let me. I avoid intervals for that very reason. Don't let anyone escape. When you think about the kind of crazy stories where you have felt, like I always think of it, this terrible, old, wonderful, terrible, kind of kitsch horror movie from, I'm not even sure, the 60s or the 70s, I think the 70s, called Trilogy of Terror, that an actress called Karen Black was in, where this little doll comes alive and tries to eat the person in her apartment. Now that film terrifies me more than any other film I've ever seen. It's completely unrealistic, and yet every time I see it, I completely suspend disbelief, and I enter the world of that movie, and it reminds me of what is possible as a writer if you are telling your story well, and if you are making its emotional truth available to the audience. So where does authenticity come from? How do you manufacture something, the chief trait of which is not to be manufactured? How do you bring authenticity to something? It's such a kind of, amorphous concept. We feel it, we know when we feel it, but how do you actually harness it and bring it to your work? The simple answer to that, I think, is that whatever story you're telling, it has to be rooted in your life, your experience, your psychological reality. And the closer the link between who you are emotionally and what you write, the more likely you are to get away with your fabricated story. The older I get, the more I realise that everything that makes me a writer, and pretty much every repetitive preoccupation and theme in my writing, was there in the first 10 years of my life. And it took me a long time to realise that, but those childhood years, for better or worse, are not only undeniable in your writer's voice, they're the energy of your writer's voice. And your adult years as a writer are about really identifying and harnessing that energy, the energy of who you are as a human being. Stanislavski said, the further you go back, the purer the emotion. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So I'm slightly optimistically coined a mid-career writer. I loathe that phrase, but then mid everything kind of, sounds middle age. Anyway, let's not go there. But despite being a mid-career writer, I kind of, for many, many years, have said to myself that every play is different. Every play is fundamentally different, and I'm constantly evolving. I'm constantly changing. I'm constantly exploring new terrain, because each one of my plays has a different plot, and each one of my plays has a population of different characters. But at a certain point in my life, probably when I was about 40, I was forced, because a student did a PhD on my work, and I did what one should never do, which is Google myself. And this PhD popped up, and I read it. It was called something like the repetitions and rhetorical devices in the plays of Joanna Murray Smith, and I got this unbelievable shock. I thought, well, what do you mean the repetitions? I was horrified. Because I thought I was, ever new and changing and growing and learning. And that sent me on a kind of sleuthing project through my work to see what this guy was talking about. And I began to realise that there were certain themes and certain preoccupations that I just couldn't let go of without even being conscious of what they were. And, there are many of them, but, I write a lot about the subjectivity of memory. I write a lot about mothers and daughters. I write a lot about where heads collide with emotions. And there are lots of kind of little sub-themes. And even when I kind of resentfully sit down and try very, very hard to write something that avoids any of these themes, inevitably, when I'm in a preview audience, watching that play for the first time with an audience, I see them there. They may be camouflaged or buried, but they are there. So I began to realise that those themes were kind of in my soul, They were so deeply rooted inside me, there was nothing I was going to be able to do to get rid of them. And after I got over my kind of petulant reaction to that, I sort of started to embrace it. And I, began to realise that a lot of the writers that I admired had also had repetitive themes. And that's why I loved them, because I loved the things that they wrote about. I liked the way that they wrote. I liked them for being who they were. And so it's okay to be who you are. And it's okay to be driven by a specific small group of concerns and preoccupations and themes. It's okay, in a sense, to repeat yourself, is what I'm saying. And I think that life is so eternally surprising, and human beings are so completely kind of ravishingly expandable in the way that we embrace aging and the way we embrace experience, that even if you stick to the same themes and preoccupations, they are always going to be energised and reignited by who you are at 20, at 30, at 40, at 50, and so on. So one of the few upsides of a writing life, I shouldn't say that, should I? One of the many upsides of the writing life, to make up for the issues of income and, lack of income and emotional precariousness that stays with you throughout, is that you not only can, but you must be grateful for the parts of you that are particular to you. They are your lifelong creative reservoir. So don't think you can keep your secrets. Your secrets are there to be exploited. We're in the service of the unconscious forces that shape our life. We're not the master of those forces. And of course, in becoming writers and developing as writers, you are a little bit of both. You are a little bit at the mercy of your subconscious, and you are also quite a lot a kind of manipulator and crafts person. You are crafting, you are part artist, part craftsperson. And I think the journey of becoming a writer is in part working out which hat you should be wearing when. The gold mine that you're plumbing as a writer is who you are and how you hear, see, touch, and in all but your case, Laura, smell. Our senses are our kind of, palette, which we are painting from. Your source material is within you. Your perspective on the world, your prejudices, your upbringing, your psychological frailties, your anxieties, your experiences, your relationships, your learning curves, the getting of wisdom. All of these things become your source material. And that's a kind of wonderful thing, I think, to acknowledge, that there is no part of your life, there is no part of your waking or even sleeping life that is not grist to your mill as writers. And that's a kind of wonderful thing, I think, is that you don't have to travel, you don't have to have money, you don't have to study writing. If you are a writer, you will be a writer. You won't be able to not be a writer. That level of obsession and determination will win out. And all you really need is your experience as a human being wherever you happen to be and whoever you happen to be. I often say that the kind of algebra of a writing life is almost equal parts vulnerability and ego. You need to have both. And what you really need to sustain a writing life is just to have a little bit more ego than vulnerability. That's the way to do it. And at times, of course, you don't get that equation right. I mean, I myself know I can go to a matinee performance of a play of mine and come out devastated and just think I've hoodwinked everyone. I can't believe that all these people, these guys who the carpenters who built the set and right through to the publicists who publicised this play have been hoodwinked because this is such a piece of artifice and so clearly that, and what am I doing and why do I think I can tell a story when the Greeks did it best a long time ago? What can I do that they haven't already done? And all of those thoughts, right through to the very, depressing and kind of pitiful ones, such as, why is this person more successful than me when they're less talented? So you run the entire gamut.
So it never goes away.
It never goes away. It never goes away. And then I can go to an evening performance and come out, and the magic was in the air that night. The audience were beautiful and giving and generous and connected with the actors on the stage. The actors were beautiful and giving and generous and connected with the words. And they sold it, they sold this figment of my imagination with such spirit and such joy and such, belief and such faith. And then I came out and reaped the rewards because the audience are high and happy or moved and come up and say lovely things. And then, you know, your ego starts to move up again and you think, what's the next idea? I can't wait to write the next play. You know, how much time do I have tomorrow to write? And my life, at least, is a constant battle between those two things. And it's not just a battle from play to play or production to production, you know, good experience, happy experience to disappointing experience. It's almost minute to minute in my life. I'm a human being throughout the day. I'm a mother throughout the day. I'm a friend. I'm a wife. I'm all sorts of things throughout the day. But I'm also a writer throughout the day. And there's almost no time when I'm not thinking about ideas, thinking about what I've written, thinking about what I want to write, thinking about what I'm not writing and should be writing. And mixed up in all of that is this roller coaster of emotion, of joy and ecstasy and self-belief, followed by despair, absolute despair. But, you know, what can you do? If you have to do it, you have to do it. And I'm assuming that we all have to do it, and we're all here for the long haul, and you're all here for the long haul. Moving on. Part of that searching for authenticity, which is about harnessing our own experience and our own emotions, is also about avoiding creating or looking for or attempting to create a voice for yourself. Don't try to create a writer's voice. The more you try to find or create a style for your writing, the further you are going to travel from authenticity. Forget style. Just write in the most natural voice that comes to you. And that is going to be your most efficient way of telling stories. When I had my second professional play on, I went to a preview, and afterwards I went upstairs and I called my husband from a little office in the theatre, and I cried. I think he was my lover, and I cried and cried and cried, and he said, you know, did they hate it? And I said, no, they loved it. And he said, well, were the performances terrible? I said, no, the performances were fantastic. And he said, did they clap at the end? And I said, yeah, they clapped and clapped, they loved it. And he said, well, why are you crying? And I said, because I don't sound like a writer. My voice doesn't sound like a playwright. And it took me a very long time to relax. It took me a very long time to realise that good or bad, liked or not liked, well reviewed or badly reviewed, that was my voice. And I had no choice but to stick with it. So put all concerns about style aside. That's a total red herring. You know, I always think about Elmore Leonard, that wonderful, wonderful crime writer, who said, if it sounds like writing, rewrite it. You know, you want to stay away from that sense of artifice or stylistic kind of construction. Just write as naturally as you can. So you are the writer that you are, and the job is not to create a voice that sounds like a writer, but to liberate the writer's voice that is already inside you. Emotion is your friend. What makes your characters human is your humanity. Wonderful, wonderful American writer, Tina Howe, fabulous American writer. If you don't know her plays, you should read them. Said, a writer knows that what is most private in her heart of hearts is also the most astonishing. And that's what I meant when I said to be surprising, you need to be very personal. If you are truly personal, if you reveal very, very profound and deeply felt things about yourself, you're both going to connect with other people, and they are going to find that astonishing and therefore engage with you. So let's do a writing exercise. I've been talking for a long time. So this is going to be about closing your eyes and getting comfortable and remembering. So don't write for the moment, just close your eyes, and I'm going to describe what I want you to do. You know, sort of wriggle your shoulders, feel, try and relax your body. I'm going to ask you to remember a couple of moments from your life. It doesn't matter whether it's from childhood, from your teenage years, more recently, but when you find this memory, I want you to stay with it and try to recall exactly how you felt in that moment and what prompted those feelings. So run back through your life and try to find a moment or a time when you felt deep desire for someone or something. It could be a child and a toy, it could be wanting to go somewhere and not being able to, because I want you to not only think of something you desired, but also when you were denied it and how you were denied it. Think of a time in your past where you really badly wanted something and you couldn't have it. I want you to just sit inside this feeling. Remember how badly you wanted this thing. Remember what that sense of longing felt like. And then go into the feelings of when you knew or when you were told that you couldn't have it. If you want to, if you can really sort of feel that inside you, I'm going to be quiet for a minute so that you can really feel those feelings. You can write a few notes about it if you just want to hold on to some of the important thoughts that you're having about how you felt. So once again, just remember a time in your past when you deeply desired something and you couldn't have it. Think about those feelings. Make some notes on how you felt. These are notes just for yourself. You won't have to read these aloud. Now, I want you to close your eyes again. Stop writing. Close your eyes again. And I want you to remember a time when you felt, this time this is a different memory, when you felt deeply humiliated. It could be a moment from childhood, it can be from teenage years, it can be to do with relationships, it can be to do with school, it can be recently in a relationship, or in any situation where you felt profoundly humiliated. if you want to, write yourself a couple of notes about that feeling, the feelings of humiliation. Okay. So the point of that exercise is really to begin to train yourself to be able to harness your own emotional archive. I'm just wondering, maybe as an example, perhaps Natasha, can you just tell us what your moment of humiliation, how it felt to you, that moment of humiliation?
Yeah, did you want me to read them?
You can if you want to, or you can just talk.
I can read the notes. Sweaty and cold, mostly confused, expectant, exhausted and impatient, infinitely impatient, grotesque and self-loathing, clinical, critical and ashamed.
Great, fantastic. And you were sort of feeling the depth of that and analysing what that feeling was composed of when you wrote that list. Yeah.
Like pull the individual, like going through them.
Yeah.
Because I was kind of visualising it and trying to remember.
Yeah.
Just like you have a small like imagery playing.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Does anyone want to talk about the feelings of what they were feeling when they were denied the thing that they desired?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was like a sense of like understanding of being denied, but also coming back to being quite frustrated and confused as to why I was being denied, but also completely knowing why I was being denied that.
So it was kind of irrational feeling.
It was irrational.
Yeah.
And I associate that memory very much with a noise. And so I often associate like howling wind
Yes.
with that noise.
Yeah, great.
Which I also...
Which you think is rage or...?
Well, the memory occurred on a highway, and I'm quite happy to say that, it occurred on a highway, and I was outside a car, and it was so heavy that I couldn't actually hear the cars passing. And it was 10 a.m. in the morning.
The wind was...
The wind was so heavy I couldn't hear any other car passing. And like time stood still, and it was kind of mesmerising in a weird way. Like it was very... I knew what was going on, and I understood that I was being denied it.
What were you being denied?
I was being denied an explanation.
Right. From another person?
From another person.
Right, okay.
I was being denied human contact as well.
Right.
And at the same time, I was being denied it, but I thought, I understand.
Yeah.
Because I'd denied as well.
Yeah.
But
Look,
I understood it.
That's great. And Laura, can you talk about the feeling of desiring something? What were you feeling when you were thinking about, going back inside that memory of desiring something very deeply?
Yeah. Well, the memory I chose, I think it was just this kind of complete alignment to one singular thing. And like every sensation and every thought is just directing towards this one thing that you can't think about anything else because that's all you want. And every single action is just so you can do it. And there's kind of impatience. This absolute everything needs to be sped up. Why would you walk when you can run kind of thing?
Because you're feeling obsessed.
Yeah, and kind of complete kind of like that phrase like tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you can't think about anything else and you can't even contemplate the idea that you would be denied it because the desire is just so much, it's all consuming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dan, were you able to go inside any of those feelings? Humiliation, desire, denial? Did one of them come more easily to you than the others?
I find it difficult. I can access behaviours
Right.
that I did. There's things like thinking on behalf of other people with humiliation when you don't remember things you said when you were drunk, for example, and you're just going on the look in someone's eyes, and you don't want to know. But you'd be better off to know because it can't possibly as bad as what you're imagining in your own head.
Well,
and then so there's that sense of self-fantasy too.
That's a really interesting observation.
Yeah.
That sometimes what we fantasize is worse than the reality. We'd be better off with the reality.
Yeah. Sometimes you don't even notice the reality.
Yeah.
It zips by and you're so busy fantasising about how awful something is.
Yeah, this is me in reviews, totally. People say you should read it. Actually, wasn't that bad, you know. I'm thinking,
You don't read reviews?
No, I don't read. I don't read reviews. I don't read reviews. Mainly because I have to feed my children. And if I read a really, really bad review written by someone I have no respect for, it affects me as badly as a really bad review from someone I have great respect for. It doesn't matter who says it. You know, I'm kind of very democratic in how sensitive I am. I'm sensitive, absolutely everything. Yeah.
You only need that one, don't you?
You only need the one. Yeah.
For the rest of your life.
Exactly.
I remember things I've said that were just awful, and knowing it at the time. And some of these things, there's two lines in particular I'm not even going to say, but it happened like 20 years ago, and I'll still be gardening or on the toilet, and I'll go, oh.
Yeah.
They probably didn't even notice, but they're just so clearly summed up the way I don't want to see myself.
Yes. Well, those feelings of humiliation, I'm just thinking, last week at my play that's on at the moment, someone who shall be nameless, when I came out into the foyer, I should say that, my audiences have been very enthusiastic about it. But this person, who shall be nameless, said, looked at me, and I was sort of waiting for the congratulations, it was great, and they said, oh, how long did it take to choreograph the fight scene? And I thought, okay, they didn't like my play. So, yes.
What about all they really, really are dying to know what this fight
Maybe. Well, yes, I mean,
You're probably right.
I am paranoid. Yeah.
Could I do that? I'm reading so much more into everything people
of
say.
course. And
That's
we've all
real
had
character,
the,
isn't it?
only you could do that, which you're going, what does that mean? But anyway, enough of that. Let's not dwell on criticism. We can talk about that later, and there may well be questions out there about dealing with critics and exposure. But the point of that exercise, we'll do something with it very soon. But I just wanted to show you that you can do these little exercises for yourself when you're at home on your own, where you can choose an emotion. And Dan, maybe you need to do this a lot, and where you just begin to train yourself to be able to enter into these very intense feelings. And it's amazing how, even if you don't use them in what you're writing in that moment, if you just write a piece of dialogue where you are incorporating that feeling, if you have done that exercise well, and it can take a while before you do those exercises well, some people it's very easy, other people it's harder, that writing is going to have a certain kind of vitality, and you're going to begin to understand the connection between your own emotional reservoir and what you're giving to your characters. But when I talk about the personal, how important it is, I also want to emphasise that you mustn't confuse your personal emotional truth with autobiographical storylines or plot lines. I'm not saying that you need to write about your life. I've never written a directly autobiographical piece of writing. certainly not for the stage. And in fact, my mother used to run around foyers telling everybody, the strangers in the foyer, you know, this play isn't autobiographical, because I was writing about things like sex abuse and, you know, adoption and there's a very big difference between those two things. There's a very big difference between being emotionally authentic and personal and actually writing about people and things that you know. And I'm really just saying this as a kind of little sidebar, when I say personal, I'm talking about your prejudices, your tastes, your anxieties, your vulnerabilities, your flaws, your ambitions, your emotional DNA. These things are all rocket fuel for your writing life. But, you know, your best friend isn't. You know, your actual best friend isn't. Your actual husband or wife isn't. Your sister or brother. And, you know, as a writer, as you go through your writing life, you are constantly walking a line between autobiography and invention. Because often your feelings are associated with specific moments, and there is the temptation to actually reincarnate that moment. But I would advise you not to do that. I would advise you to take the feelings, but not the situation, not the personalities. And I say that because I've kind of learnt myself the dangers of that. I've made that mistake once, where I wrote about someone I knew and I lost that friendship. And I never really did it again. In a way, it's about taste. You know, in a way, I think it is about good taste. It's a very unfashionable phrase, but I think it's actually quite an important thing to learn as a writer, that you do not exploit everyone and everything in the name of art, but do exploit your feelings. So, let's do another writing exercise now about choosing a character. I want you to choose a character that it could be a character that you are already writing in something that you're developing at the moment. It's quite useful sometimes to kind of liberate yourself from writer's block, or you know, if you're a bit stuck with someone, is to choose a character that you're already invested in. But if not, you can just invent one right now. And I'm just going to say a whole list of questions about them, and I want you to just write down literally 1 or 2 word answers, and I don't want you to really dwell on those answers. I'm not going to give you time to dwell on those answers. It's just going to be a whole list, and this is kind of like an exercise of a very sort of speedy exercise about not being precious about coming up with a character. You don't have to be precious. You can do this just as a writing exercise. It doesn't have to be to do with an actual work that you're doing. But it's quite a good exercise about letting go of your own sort of preciousness about getting things right all the time. Sometimes it's just about letting things flow, being fluid. Okay, so if you want to, close your eyes and just think about this character for a moment. So pluck a character from thin air or from, you know, the pages that you are writing at home. If it's a character you don't know yet, just think about what they look like. Think about their visual image. And then just write 1 or 2 words on these questions. What is their name? So name them. How old are they? Is English their first language? If not, what is their first language? We're assuming they speak English. We're assuming that you write your plays in English, so they have to speak English. But it may not be their first language. What is their single most marked physical characteristic? So if you looked at them, you saw them from a cafe, and you looked across the street and you saw them walking by, what's the one thing about them that you'd notice? Just pick anything. What is their educational level? How well educated are they? Did they have a private or a public education? Did they pay for their education? Was their education paid for or was it free? What kind of environment do they live in? City, country, suburb? What sort of dwelling do they live in? Rich or poor, cramped, spacious? What's their favourite object in their dwelling? Something in their house or in their apartment or where they live that they love or that's important to them. What did their father do? Why did they hate him? What was it about their father that they didn't like, that they hated, that they felt strongly about, negatively about? Why did they love him? What was it about him that they loved, even if they hated him? What did their mother do? Why did they hate her? Why did they love her, even if they hated her? Who do they live with? Who do they love? Are they loved back? Pick 3 words which summon their public persona. So if someone saw them out and about, what 3 words would people use to describe them? Now pick a different 3 words for their private selves, for the people they are when they're at home by themselves. What are they afraid of? What one thing do they have that other people envy? What is trapping them, or what makes them feel trapped in their life? You can just pick one thing. What did they want when they were a child? What did they hope was up ahead for them that they would have or achieve? Did they achieve it? If they didn't achieve it, what got in their way? Do they have a neurosis or a phobia? They don't have to, but if they do, write it down. What are they proud of? Assume they've done one criminal act. What criminal act was it? What crime has your character committed? It can be a misdemeanor. And finally, sort of, in what circumstances were they morally confused? Can you think of a situation in which they were morally confused? So at the risk of your hands all being about to drop off, I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine this character in a physical location. Where is this character situated? Now, because we're playwrights and we're writing plays, think about the physical location as represented on a stage. You don't have to say how it's created, but just think about it as a visual image of the stage. And now just write a very brief description. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to write a very brief description of what type of space they're in, what it looks like, what season it is, what time of day. So just kind of the physical situation that your character is in. You might want to think about whether they're sitting or standing or lying down, what they're wearing. Is it quiet or noisy? Is it a conceptual look or, abstract, or is it a very naturalistic look? Basically, just finding a place for your character is really all I'm asking you to do. Now, these are just notes for yourself, so you don't have to read this aloud. Now, just close your eyes again and think about your character in that space. And I want you to bring another character into that space, a second person. It can be someone in the play that you're writing, or it can be a new character, or if these characters are not in anything that you're already writing, just make someone up. And just write down their relationship to the first character. Write down their relationship to your first character, the one that had all the long list, and name your second character, just for the hell of it. So we're just going to leave that for a moment, and I'm just going to talk for a little bit, and then we're going to do something with that. We talked earlier, or I was talking earlier, about finding the humanity in your characters, and that their humanity comes from your humanity. So I just want to kind of go over some of the things to keep in mind when you're creating character, is that as human beings, your characters need to reflect the same aspects of us as human beings in order to be authentic. So we intend things and then we fail in our intentions, don't we? We often intend to do something or to be something and we don't succeed because for whatever reason we can't come through. We might like to appear as if we know things in public or even in our relationships, but we often don't know and we're just pretending because we're trying to present ourselves as a certain way. How to run a masterclass, for instance. We believe in things, or we think we believe in certain things, but when push comes to shove, we might be ambivalent. So when you think about, you know, women who say mothering is the best thing I've ever done, but often will have moments of deep ambivalence about being a mother in the darker moments. We all feel ambivalent about things that we profess to love, or people we profess to love at times. Sometimes we don't know what we think. Sometimes we're in situations where we're at the mercy of our emotions and we don't really know what to think. We're at a loss. And sometimes we express a kind of ideology or something that we believe in, but actually what we're feeling goes against it. What we're feeling is not really supporting that ideology. Our heads are perpetually colliding with our emotions. And thank God they do, because it's those inconsistencies that make us interesting as human beings. And so it is in drama. Your play shouldn't be full of people who know what they're doing. Your play shouldn't be full of people who believe what they say to others or make good always on their intentions, because that's not how people are. And your audience isn't like that. We're humans. That means we're inconsistent and we're flawed and we're hypocritical. And the real story that we tell others is often not the real story. The story of what we think or what we believe or what we're doing or what we're good at or what we're mastering or how we're triumphing in life is often not the real story. So we lie. We delude ourselves. We delude others. And really, when we're writing our characters in our plays, we, in as much as our characters are saying things, and forgive me out there in the world if you know this already, I'm stating things because I think it's important to say them. We're not just letting our characters say who they are and what they think. We're also writing the story behind the words. The words are not telling, the words that our characters say are not telling the whole story of our play. Our whole story is told just as much in the silences. It's told just as much visually in the way our actors look, in the expressions in their faces, in their three-dimensional humanity. And sometimes I think when we're beginning as writers, we feel that everything that we have to say is going to be expressed in the mouths of our characters. But a lot of what we really want to say needs to be cleverer than that. And it needs to be hidden in the language that our characters use, not declared by our characters. I mean, you know, people talk about subtext. Effectively, this is the subtext. Sometimes our characters might speak and give themselves away by us writing broken lines where their determination to finish a sentence falters because they're lying, or because they don't know what they think, or because they're scared of how it's going to be received. They're not as brave as they think, as they want to be regarded as. So in your plays, you have to allow room for the unsaid. You have to allow room for the parts of us as human beings that don't make sense, that aren't logical. Does that sort of make sense to you? So much of who we are as human beings, and so much of what's interesting about our characters, are the secrets that the characters hold. And all characters have secrets, because all human beings have secrets. And our secrets often drive us, whether they're driving us because we're putting up armour to protect them, or they're driving us because they're part of the emotional fabric of who we are. And you don't have to tell all your characters' secrets. You can let those secrets drive your characters without declaring them, without peeling every layer off the onion. The emotion and power in your writing is often in what's left unsaid. And you have to listen to your characters, and you have to allow them not to know themselves. And this is a very, very hard lesson to grasp. And I'm still trying to teach myself that. I still look at I just rewrote on the, third last day of rehearsals. I rewrote a speech that a character gives in my play, Three Little Words, that's on at the moment, because she knew too much in that speech. And I had to go back and I had to rewrite that speech so she wasn't so in control of what she was saying, because it didn't feel real. It felt completely constructed. It was about holding parts of her back. And let the audience do the deducing. Let the audience come to your work. Don't give them everything. Let them work a bit to understand your characters. It's going to be so much more interesting for the audience to be able to fill in the gaps and bring their own life and their own experience and their own imagination to your work. And your characters are going to be so much more real if they don't declare themselves entirely. They hold on to their secrets and their secret private drives. So very quickly, I want to talk about the balance between your conscious self and your unconscious self as writers. You know yourselves, I'm sure you felt that feeling of, when you're writing, when you're working too hard at what you're doing. You're trying too hard and it's not really working, it's not really coming. It feels constructed, it feels difficult, it feels a bit tortured. And you sort of know, I might as well stop because there's not going to be any gold here. And I think that, developing as writers is a lot about working out the power of your unconscious and allowing it to be liberated. Now, the way that everybody has their own ways of doing this. Some people do it by having a glass of wine before they write. Some people do it by writing when they're tired. I often write when I'm tired because I'm less in control of what I'm doing. And I like that feeling of being less in control. I like writing having had a glass of wine. I don't say to myself, I'm working tonight, I'm not going to have a glass of wine with dinner, because I like anything that is helping me undo the discipline around. This is when I'm writing a first draft of a play. If you're writing anything that's ultimately going to have conviction and passion and depth, you're going to find your conscious self shipwrecked on the rocks of your subconscious. Your subconscious is going to, your conscious self is going to be tipped upside down by the parts of you that you're not in control of. And that's that lovely feeling when you're writing, when your characters seem to be writing themselves. When you're on a roll and the dialogue just flows and you're not stopping yourself. You've got no one sitting on your shoulder, judging, criticising, critiquing, saying, I'll read over that line, oh, it's not quite right. You have to suspend the critic. And as a first draft writer, when I'm writing that first draft of a play, I absolutely remove any sense of criticism over what I'm doing, and I just write and I write and I write. And if I think this section doesn't have much to it, I just keep pushing through. And the fluidity of the words and the fluidity of the language and the fact that I'm not going back over it and rereading it somehow begins to loosen me up. And in that first draft, which I write very, very quickly in a very cathartic way, in that first draft, I usually take no more than a month to write that first draft of a full-length play. Sometimes I write it in a week, and I just keep going. Now, at the end of that week or at the end of that month, what I have is 120 pages of very cathartic, very fluid, very energetic writing. If you put it on stage, people would ask for their money back, you know. The next part of the process, which is the part of crafting, that craftsperson that I was talking about before, which is about working out where you need to structure, how you need to structure, if you have a certain resolution, how you kind of bury the weapons for that resolution, how you plant in early in your play the triggers that are going to make that ending feel believable and feel right. You know, you do a lot of very conscious, very logical, very rational thinking about what you've written. You might read your first draft and say, that character completely disappears for 10 pages, and I want to keep them alive throughout the play. Or in this group scene where we have 7 people talking, 2 of them don't have much to say. And what I really need to do is work out myself what I want them to feel in this scene. What is their job in this scene? What do they want in this scene? And so I need to go back and work on those 2 voices. Or you might feel that the ending that you reach feels cliched, and you like the story and you like the dynamism of the story and you're in love with your characters. You should be in love with your characters. But the ending is really wrong, and you need to sit down and have a really good, rational, logical think about what would be an original but correct ending for the story that you have created. So there's a lot of conscious thinking and a lot of crafting, and that for me goes on for at least a year. I mean, I've never had a play on in under a year and a half from when I first wrote it. Usually quite a lot longer than that by the time it's programmed by a theatre company. And the entire time before it's programmed, after I've written a draft that I've submitted, I am rewriting, I'm editing, I'm working on structure, I'm thinking about how it could be better, I'm getting my friends to read it out aloud, not to act, but just because I want to hear those words out loud in the space. That process, I love that process. I love that crafting process. But when I sit down and watch that play with that first preview audience or through those previews, and I look at the finished play, and if I'm really, really honest with myself, you know, I will be judging the quality of the crafting that I did over that year or year and a half or 2 years. But everything that's gold in that play, everything that's really truthful, everything that's really surprising and truthful at the same time was there in that first draft, was there in that cathartic unleashing. And generally that has been true for all of my plays. But everything most interesting about them is there at the very beginning. But you could never put that up on stage. You need to harness that very experienced, and obviously you gain experience through having your work done, even if it's done in garages, you know, even if it's done around your kitchen table. You're learning all the time about the craft of playwriting, and you are applying what you're learning to that cathartic, emotional, dynamic energy that is the grist of the play. So my suggestion is that you allow control to lapse, and you find ways of letting that control lapse. Give yourself freedom from the role of captain of your play. Don't steer the ship all the time. Let the ship drift. Let it go in whatever way it feels like going. You can always turn it back on course or your original course. But what you might find is that the course that your characters are driving is a more interesting one. The story that your characters want to tell might be more interesting than the story you planned to tell. And all sorts of things may come up. Don't be didactic. Assume that your reader or your audience is smarter than you are. And I think this is a very, very important lesson to learn. Your characters cannot be mouthpieces for a point of view. They cannot be mouthpieces for polemic. They have to have, as I was talking about before, they have to be irrational and difficult and inarticulate because that's who we are. So I was going to talk about the terror of not understanding what we're revealing and how in the course of writing, part of the job of the writer is to have a kind of willful amnesia that it is one day going to be public, that you have to sort of forget about the fact that it's going to end up being, in the public domain, because if you keep that present, you're never going to write anything really interesting and anything really revealing. So you learn to suspend that, and I do it every time. So when I sit in that preview audience, I get the most horrible shock at the first preview, where I go, not only did I have those thoughts, but those thoughts are now going to be attributable to me. That double whammy of I'm a seriously weird person, and now everybody is going to know that is part of my experience always through the previews, and that's the way it has to be, I think. So let's do a little writing exercise. I want you, and this is sort of coming towards the final part of my mad, scramble to convey something useful to all of you out there who are participating in this, and the 6 of you in here. I want you to remember those 2 characters from earlier, the one that we wrote the long list about, and then the second character that you brought into that world. And remember where you put them. Remember that visual landscape. And I want you to very quickly write a piece of dialogue between those 2 characters. One of those characters has to desire something. The other character has to be denied it. And I don't want you to state what the desired thing is. They have to make their desire felt. They have to be trying to get something, but don't articulate what it is. Don't state it sort of boldly. And the other person has to deny it, again without saying, no, you can't have that. Let them deny it to them in a more interesting way. And try to draw on those feelings that you had before. It's the feelings that you had of desire and denial, that frustration, that howling wind, that, tunnel vision, that obsessiveness. Those feelings are what you need to bring into this piece of writing, not the scenario that those memories were drawn from. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes. So, who would like to read their little piece of dialogue with their neighbour? Come on, be brave.
I will.
Good on you, well done. Brownie points. Brownie points for Laura.
Set the bar low.
Do you want to read it with, will you read it with
Sure.
Jordan or Dan?
Jordan. Sorry, just excluding you there. You can be E and I will be H.
Yeah.
Do we need to know anything about the characters?
Yeah, if you like.
So this is like a mother-daughter. Daughter's early 20s, but still living at home. And I don't want to say the secret.
No, don't.
Okay, cool. So
Yep. Okay, so you're playing the mother or the daughter?
I'll play the mother.
Okay.
So E is the daughter. So
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
You're home.
Yes. Why are you perched like that?
Need a hand? Anything in the car, I can bring it in if you...
What are you doing up there?
I was just on my way up when I heard the door.
Come here.
What? No, I'm on my way up unless you...
What is that on your neck?
Let me know if you need a hand with dinner, yeah? Like,
We're ordering in.
oh, well, I can, chip in if you...
Darling, come here.
Okay, tell us about that.
So I think the daughter has a boy upstairs. And
She's got a little love bite.
yeah, it has a love
Yeah.
bite and kind of was just coming from like the bathroom or something, and then her mum kind of came in, and then she was just trying to work out the best way.
So
to
she
deal
was
with that
desiring time with her.
Yeah, she was desiring just to go upstairs so she could like tell him to
Yeah.
leave or whatever, or just
Right,
be
but
with him.
she wasn't being allowed to do that by
Yes,
the mother.
yes.
Great, fantastic,
Yes.
excellent. Who else would like to read?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, good. Go on.
Laura?
Fantastic.
This is a conversation between two people that I wrote about before that have a very new relationship. Minutes old.
Okay.
Almost.
Minutes old.
Minutes
Okay.
old. I'm Amelia.
Okay.
Can you be Ryan?
Yes. Hello, Amelia.
Mrs. Ong.
Titles are invalid here.
Titles are invalid. What else is? I didn't see anything on the flyer about being invalid.
No worries, Miss Ong. Were you a teacher?
No. Chef. Manager.
Chef. Chef Ong.
No, it's Mrs. Ong.
We could get you to give some of the kitchen staff some suggestions.
What would I be paying for them then?
Oh, you know.
But do you take suggestions?
Yeah, always. Boxes on the counter. Yours will be number 1.
Can you talk to us about what your scenario was, what you were...
She is a 78-year-old Asian woman who's had a successful culinary life.
Yeah.
And has kind of forcibly been put into this centre for seniors that is not a retirement village and not like a care centre.
Right.
And he's the recreational and leisure advisor.
Okay.
And I think he's very much used to warmth and like a kind of, yeah, come on, like,
Yeah.
And she's like, no,
More resistant.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
She's not going to give him what he wants.
No,
Yeah.
no way.
Great. Great. Any other?
I'll give a crack at it.
Go on. Do you want us to know a little bit about your characters first?
Yeah, sure. So the characters I wrote, there's one called Roadkill. It's from a play. He's a 47-year-old man, and Fatima, who's a 9-year-old girl. So
Can I be the fat man?
Do you want to be? There's Fatima and there's Roadkill. Oh my god! 2017. Be whoever you like.
No, but isn't Roadkill a fat man?
Not necessarily, but he can be. You,
I just got stuff.
You act, you.
Yeah, I'm blessed.
So Roadkill.
So hang on, who's the little girl?
Fatima.
Yeah, but which one of you?
I can be Fatima.
Sure.
You're
Okay.
Roadkill.
Okay.
All right.
Wait, so Roadkill was older man.
Yes.
Why is he so fat in my head? Anyway. Okay, let's do it.
Maybe he is. Yeah, beautiful. You can play him like that.
Sure.
Beautiful. So he's and I'll be Fatima.
Sure.
Do you live here?
Yeah.
It's a bit small.
You don't like it?
You've got no windows.
Nah.
You've got no doors.
Nah. Are you scared of me?
No. What about food?
I can get food.
I could go to the shops now.
There's no shops.
Well, of course there's shops.
You wouldn't know where there were, so there's no point in going.
Were you wanking before?
What?
Were you wanking before when I came in? When you were standing over there? I swear to God.
No.
You definitely were.
I wasn't having a fucking wank.
Long beat. For a minute, violence seems possible. I need the bathroom.
It's outside. You need a key.
Can I have the key?
I lost it. There's a bucket over there.
Ooh. Ooh. I mean, that can the beginning I thought, this is comedy, and then it very quickly became a feeling of real awkwardness, and then got more and more sinister as it went on. Very well done. Short period of time. That's great. I mean, it was also very easy to visualise, I guess, because early on you said about there being no windows and doors. Suddenly you were in this really dark space, and what was great about that was that you weren't telling us everything. It was getting back to that idea of she's scared, but she's not showing it. He's resisting revealing himself, his true self. So I think that's a great example of how you can say a lot about characters without the characters actually declaring themselves and who they are and what they are and how they want to be perceived. We see more than they tell us, effectively. Very good, fantastic. So we've probably got time for one more, very quickly, if you want to.
I don't want to follow that. All right. Do you need any context?
Yes, sure, if it's going to be helpful.
Two old school friends or youth group friends who one is organising a weekend away 30th, really wanting to nail it.
Yeah.
The other just wants to have a good weekend. So, could you be Candace, please?
Yeah, of course.
Great. Do you think I made enough Dalmatis?
Dalmatis?
The green things. The rice packets wrapped in vine leaves?
Oh, I think there's enough.
Great, good. Is that light too dim? I want the vibe to be moody, but I also want people to see the food. The Dalmatis, they're not the centerpiece, but they're pretty great. They're pretty good.
I'm pretty sure people can see the Dalmatis.
Great. So, yeah, without her declaring she's a control freak and a really annoying person and someone who wants everyone to think very well of her and her culinary skills and her mastery, you managed to get that across very economically and very well. That's great. So, look, the idea of these little exercises is to, give you the opportunity to sort of play those games with yourself in your own space. You can... if you're feeling stuck, you can do that character, that list of, to just try and sort of find someone from thin air. And then you can write those pieces of dialogue harnessing two emotions that you recall. And sometimes it's just enough to get the juices flowing and you can go back to what you're writing. And I mean, I actually did exercises similar to this when I was at Columbia University in New York. And I was doing a class there with a brilliant playwright called Eduardo Machado. And I ended up writing a play virtually. I wrote Honor, one of my early, probably one of my most successful plays, simply through doing those exercises. That I just kept going back to the same characters every time I did one of those exercises, and it built, I had a vague sense about where I wanted it to go, and it just built bit by bit into a play. So they can be very useful. I'm just going to finish off by answering a couple of questions that have come in. If there's time, if any of you have a question, I'm very happy to answer it. So the first question that has come in, hello out there, hello to whoever sent this question through. What is the ambition of your work? I think that's a really, really great question, and I I think it's a good question for everybody to ask themselves who wants to be a writer, exactly what do you want? I knew really early on that I didn't want my plays to only be Australian. That was one of the things that I felt. It wasn't really a conscious choice, it was sort of more a feeling that I had, that I wanted the plays to belong to other audiences, and I wanted those audiences to feel as if the story belonged to their life. So one of the offshoots of that was that my plays very rarely have any place names, so they have very few named locations in them. And they're more about worlds that exist regardless of culture. So for instance, my characters, which I was given a very hard time about when I was a young writer, I wrote about essentially, and still do, essentially write about middle class, very educated, very articulate characters. Most of my characters are. And that's because that was the world I grew up in. They're the people I knew. That's how I heard ideas. I heard ideas in those voices. And that world exists everywhere, you know, and that's why, luckily, you know, some of my plays, not all of my plays, but some of my plays have been done in, you know, Mexico and Korea and the Middle East and all over the world, as well as in London and, you know, New York and Sydney. So one of my ambitions was to write plays that connected in an almost Greek way, that they were so fundamentally about human emotions, about loss and desire and ambition and lust and greed and love and longing, that they transcended location. So that is probably one of my main ambitions. But, you know, more generally, I guess my ambition is like most playwrights, that I would like audiences to come to my play and feel as if it was worth the money they spent on the ticket, which is getting higher and higher. Particularly for the main stages, that it has provoked them into thinking about their life or their world, and that it's done it in a way that's entertained them. You know, my ambition's probably no different to yours. The second question is, apart from not reading reviews, how do you manage having your art so much in the public eye? Thank you to whoever sent that question through. How do I manage? Very, very badly is the short answer. Have a wonderful psychiatrist, and who I will not name, but I'm kind of joking and not joking at the same time. Look, it's very difficult having your life in the public eye, there's no question about that. For some of the reasons that I've talked about, the fact is that you are learning about yourself at the same time as the world is learning about you. That's difficult because by the time you realise that there's a part of yourself you didn't want to expose, you've exposed it. And you reap the repercussions of that. The play that's on at the moment is a lot about relationships. It's about really nitty-gritty stuff to do with love. The very, very most brutal, most savage aspects of what it is to live in a long-term love affair. And it's incredibly revealing. I mean, it's not my marriage, it's the marriage of my characters that I'm writing about. But of course it's autobiographical because all of the feelings in it, the rage and the discontent and the longing and the yearning and the, as well as all the good things, are what I feel. And, you know, so it's very scary actually receiving that information about myself with 500 people in a room every night, you know, for whatever, 8 shows a week. But the upside to the writing life, the, you know, successful writing life in the sense of having plays produced, is enormous. I mean, what's more thrilling than knowing that you live your life from your imagination? What's more thrilling than sitting, and it doesn't matter the size of your theatre, it doesn't matter if it's your living room and you've got 15 people in there watching your work. What's more thrilling than thinking that for those moments where the audience are involved and clearly engaged in the world up there on the stage, what's more thrilling than thinking that this all began out of nothing? It came from nothing. I've created something out of nothing. I think that's a wonderful feeling. It must be like a carpenter who's given a piece of wood and ends up creating an object that is meaningful in some way. There are huge pitfalls. Often I don't like what I've written. Often it's disappointing to me in terms of my intentions. But then there is manifold thrills in collaboration, in putting your mind together with other creative minds and seeing your ideas flourish with the talents of other creative people, directors and designers. Everyone from the sound designer through to the wardrobe designer or the props person, not to mention the incredible, incredible actors who've taught me just about everything I know about playwriting. Being part of that creative, to use a cliched term, family, and it is a family usually for the duration of a production, and then the family breaks up. It's a sometimes sad separation, sometimes joyful separation, usually very sad. It's an incredible feeling. And then there's that joy in leading a public life of really feeling that you're engaging with your world, you're engaging with your society, you're reflecting your society, you're reaching out to your society, you're telling your society you belong there with them. You're listening to your society, you're listening to your world. And I think that, in a way, that's that sense of truly being alive. I think the best moments of a writing life, you just feel so alive inside your life. And that's what makes the exposure and the difficulty and the criticism and the self-doubt and the self-flagellation and the disappointment, of which there are many. You often have the experience of a production not being what you wanted it to, or an element of a production not being what you wanted it to, but more often that your play is not what you wanted it to be. But it's just joy to feel that ignition of an idea, and that moment when you realise in all that stream of ideas that come to you all day long, from something that your Uber driver said to a snatched conversation to something you read online, or a daydream when you're lying in the park. That moment when you realise that this is not one of the ones you're going to toss aside. This is one of the ones you're going to focus down on and build something out of, and you're going to make a world out of that. That's a really, really fantastic feeling. So really the joy of that is how I manage a public life. But I would be lying if I said that it wasn't very, very difficult at times, and I still go to bed after every opening night. I go to bed for a week. I can't talk. I have to go offline. I don't want to engage with the world because I've been engaging too much. And I read a lovely book about nothing that I'm writing. So you find your strategies for coping, I guess, with that degree of exposure. So we now have a few minutes left. Are there any questions that any of you have?
I have a question that's just a follow-on from what you were just saying about the tossing aside the ideas and that one idea that you then go with. And also about what you were saying before about writing that first draft and just like letting it flow. Do you have like a certain kind of strategy for that first dramatization of the idea? So it's like, I really want to write a play about, all the savage parts of love. Is it like, okay, so therefore I'm going to dramatize it in this way?
Yes, I think that's right. But I might have an idea, but at the same time as having the idea, I also resolve to not necessarily stick to it. I also resolve that I'm going to allow it the freedom to take me somewhere. So I might begin by strategizing. I might begin by saying, as I did in this case, My last play was about a real person. It was about Patricia Highsmith, this play I wrote called Switzerland. So my first thought was, I don't want to write about a real person because I don't want the stress of trying to get someone right. I want to have complete freedom with my characters. So that was one starting point. Another starting point was I don't want to research. I want to have all the material within me now. I want to be able to just sit down and start writing. So I'm going to write about what I know best, which is love and the nitty-gritty of domestic, intimate relationships. And so once I start thinking about that, I start thinking about a couple. And then I think, do I want to write a two-hander? And I think, no, I don't want to write a two-hander. I want it to be not too big, but I want it to be bigger than that. So I think about two couples. And then I think, well, actually, one of the things I find really interesting about relationships at the moment is that a lot of relationships around me are falling apart. And when I hear news that friends are splitting, I feel very threatened. Why do I feel threatened? Why is it that I have a really good marriage and I'm in love with my husband, and I think vice versa. So why do I feel threatened? Why do I feel insecure when other people break up? Because I start worrying that their standards of happiness are higher than ours. Maybe we're just too easily pleased with each other. And so I started to think about friendship and relationships and how couples become friends with couples. And when one couple breaks up, the friendship disbands. So it's not about four individuals, it's about two lots of two. And then I think, well, that's a really serious topic, and wouldn't it be great to be able to go into relationships in a really brutal, savage way where you just, no holds barred. I'm not holding anything back. I'm not trying to write a nice middle-class comedy. I'm actually going in there and trying to write something that's really, really savage. But of course, as soon as I start doing that, I start seeing the humour of it too, the absurd ways in which people behave. And so the play, as it turned out, ended up being a quartet, 4 voices, 2 couples, very, very brutal, savage, as I wanted it to be, but a comedy. So that was kind of the process by which, and that play started out with the thought that my main characters were the straight couple who were breaking up. But what I found as I went along was that I became totally beguiled by the lesbian couple who were their best friends, those 2 characters. And so instead of writing a play about those 2 with these 2 supporting, I made it an absolute ensemble piece where it was equally about both couples, both going through their own journeys. And I never intended that. I never expected that to happen. So, allow yourself to, to be surprised. But yes, it's perfectly reasonable to have a plan at the beginning. Dan, did you have a question?
Do you work on one project through to completion without looking at anything else, or do you go from one to the other, multiple things at once?
I have multiple things.
Right.
Yeah, I do. I think each to his own or her own. I like that. I like variety. I like that when I'm stuck with one, I can not waste a day because I can work on the other. And I work very hard, and I like working hard. I like, I'm kind of lazy as well, but I go through periods where I just go to the movies every day, and that's fine. But there are, I do like the energy that I love going to bed at night feeling that I've written something good. And it might just be 4 lines. It might be a half a scene. But you can feel it, and it's a fabulous feeling. And so I'm always really, through the course of the day, straining for that. I really want to have that feeling when I go to bed. It's a very, it's a real rocket fuel. It's like an addict, exactly. It's a high. It's a high. I'm chasing that high. And so I have more chance of getting that high if I'm not just working on one project. Yeah. Because if I'm stuck, I can move across to the other. And that works for me. The other thing I do, which is a very, very simple little trick, is that if I have a great idea, I finish the day without writing it. I just make a note of it. So that when I sit down the next day, it's good to go. And it's kind of a great way of beginning your writing day. Instead of sitting there and going, oh, now what? You go, oh, I'm so excited. because, you know, I have this thought and I'm going to see where it takes me. And of course you might find in an hour it takes you nowhere, but by then you're sort of writing, the words are flowing, and you're feeling more open.
Some famous novelists used to do that too. Like
I'm sure.
Stop in mid-sentence.
Yes.
Like, something's about to happen.
Exactly.
So that they'd have that pick up,
Exactly.
hit the ground running.
Exactly. Any other questions? No?
Maybe this is probably more from my experience, because I guess I'm just starting out with writing, but I guess with playwriting at times I can feel it like to be incredibly isolating. And oftentimes, I guess, because I'm still trying to get my work produced and haven't had anything produced, it often feels like everything's just in my head. Sometimes I'm just like, what am I doing? Like, I've been here for like 6 months. Like, I don't have feedback from anyone except myself.
Well, look, that's a good point, is find 1 or 2 people close to you who can tell you the truth without making you want to die or give up. It took me a long time to find those 2 people, but I found them and they made a huge difference. So I think that's very important, and they're people that you can have constant conversations with. The other thing is that I would recommend that you find people who don't need to be paid, friends, relatives, mothers, who will read your scenes aloud. Because even if they're not the greatest actors in the world, something happens in the energy that other people bring into the room. And, you know, use every resource available to you. And I would, as my kind of parting words, I would say there's a very great Australian writer called Frank Morehouse, who's a novelist, not a playwright, happily, otherwise, you know, I'd be out of business. But Frank says, if you don't go to the party, nothing will happen. And it's very true. Any opportunity that comes your way, any event, any form of interaction with other human beings, including parties, I might add, something might happen. You know, something might not happen, but nothing is definitely going to happen if you don't go. So you might as well give it a shot. And it's amazing how all of the good things that have happened to me professionally have happened because I kind of went, yeah, you know what, I think I'll go. What have I got to lose? And I've met someone or had a conversation that's led to something, or an idea that sparked something. So get out there in the world. And at that, I guess I should say goodbye, world. So thank you so much for participating in this masterclass. I hope you felt included, not excluded. They were really just here as props. It was all about you. And good luck with your writing life.